On this edition of the program, Israel attacks Iran, setting off a back and forth of rocket-paced violence. There is a horrifying murder of a politician in Minnesota and an ongoing manhunt, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in the streets to protest Donald Trump, while the Army's 250th anniversary parade happens in D.C. Big episode. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for June 16th, 2025. This is normally an exclusive, the Sunday edition for Substack subscribers, but sometimes there's just so much news that we have to put it outside of the paywall, and we will begin with a happy Father's Day to everybody. If you are watching us on YouTube, you can see that I got a very Facebook ad style t-shirt from my mom that had a matching shirt for my daughter for our first Father's Day. So that was very, very sweet. We've had a great day, went out to breakfast, and, it is great to be a part of the team. I will say that on our happy Father's Day. But Daddy can't take a day off when the news is coming through like this. We have breaking news on almost everything that we are going to talk about, especially our first two stories, and that is the ongoing attacks between Israel and Iran that will almost certainly continue past when we are recording, and then a horrifying story, murder of a Minnesota state senator and the attempted murder of another, a manhunt that, as we are recording, there may or may not have been a breakthrough on. So I will do my best to timestamp this. The facts of this story are still emerging. We will go through everything on it as best I can. Breaking news is obviously extraordinarily hard, and is very, very hard when you have something that is as bizarre as this. This guy who did it is just, I got questions. I got a lot of questions. And then, this normally would be the number one story. Millions of people in the streets on Saturday, according to estimates, in thousands of cities to protest Donald John Trump. Meanwhile, the parade that theoretically sparked the other demonstrations happens in D.C. And it's kind of a quaint delight. We'll go through it. All that. But first.
And we are joined now in studio by the Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Leiter. Good morning, Ambassador. Give us the latest on last night's attack. Missiles seem to be getting through. The Iranians claim they have a maneuverable missile that's harder to detect.
The Iranians have a large arsenal of ballistic missiles. We have some good defense systems, anti-missile defense systems, but they're not hermetically sealing the skies. So there's about 10 to 15% of these ballistic missiles that get through. We sustained significant attacks last night. We have over 10 fatalities and hundreds wounded.
And Prime Minister Netanyahu said what they have done to Iran so far is nothing compared to what is coming. Tell us what you can about that. And is Iran's supreme leader off the target list?
I think it's fair to say that nobody who's threatening the destruction of Israel should be off the target list. But we're not going to discuss specific individuals, online. The idea is to neutralize and terminate the Iranian intention of destroying Israel through nuclear weapons and through ballistic missiles. And anybody who gets in the way of that, or who is actually advancing that cause of destroying Israel, is obviously somebody we're going to have to deal with.
That is Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week. Of course, Israel and Iran have been exchanging heavy missile strikes over the last 3 days, escalating military action in what began as Israel's Operation Rising Lion. This exchange, of course, threatens to spiral into a broader regional conflict. Iran has retaliated with multiple waves of ballistic missiles, drones, several of which have bypassed Israel's defenses, the vaunted Golden Dome. This has caused casualties and property damage. The civilian death toll, as it stands, as I am recording this now at about 1 p.m. Central Time, Iran is reporting nearly 400 killed, including many civilians. Israel says that 13 are dead and hundreds are wounded. Israel has struck fuel depots and energy infrastructures in southern Tehran. This has sent oil prices spiking. And the Israeli Air Force claims its deepest strike yet, targeting a refueling aircraft and aerial refueling tankers. Israel has warned Iranian civilians to evacuate military-adjacent zones. They say that this attack will take weeks and not days. From our side of the Atlantic, the United States President Donald John Trump has disavowed involvement but warned U.S. military force if American interests are targeted by Iran. This all is in lead up to the G7 summit due this week in Canada, which will prioritize de-escalation with Israel and Iran. Trump on Truth Social saying today that Iran wants a deal. There is also chatter through emerging social media commentary that the Americans have vetoed an attack that could take out the Ayatollah Khamenei, the leader of Iran, and that Israel and the United States have gone back and forth on whether or not the United States would join this war effort formally. Okay, so those are all the facts I know about this situation. Here's just what I am led to believe, right? These are my priors on this. Number one, there is zero chance that this happened starting on Friday without the United States knowing about it. Donut. Zero. All right. There has been commentary since then that the press might have been played, that any rift between Netanyahu's government and the White House was something that was played up by both sides to make sure that nobody would be the wiser when Israel conducted this attack. An attack that many people knew was coming over the previous 3 days because of things that were happening in the region. I don't know whether or not that's true. It appears that the Trump White House position is that the Iranians could not have a nuclear weapon, and that they were either going to not have a nuclear weapon the easy way or the hard way. Trump said he gave them 60 days. The attack happened on the 61st. Take that for what you will. Here's something else I know. Iran is in the lowest position it has been in my lifetime. So the way that Iran has conducted its foreign influence is by way of funding proxies in the region. Many of them Shiite, some Sunni. But primarily what you're looking at are Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis, and Hamas. And since October 7th, Hamas obviously has been tremendously attrited in Gaza. Hezbollah has been essentially destroyed. And the Houthis have been severely degraded. And meanwhile, you have seen Mossad operate very, very deeply within Iran. Hamas's leader was initially killed inside Tehran, inside a palace controlled by the Revolutionary Guard. So what we saw on Friday was much like what we saw with Hezbollah with the pagers, something that was very clearly laid out for months, if not years beforehand. Israel had built a drone factory inside of Iran. That's how they were able to take out a lot of the air defenses. I don't know if it's helped organized or tracked a meeting where a lot of Iran's military leadership is going to be in the same room, and then they blew up that room. All of this happening while, jamokes like me knew that America was pulling out its own personnel from Iraq, Bahrain, and Kuwait. So you had a feeling that something was going to happen. And then Iran launches what we are assuming is the best they got. We've never seen Israel hit Iran like that. And Iran's response has killed 13 Israelis. 4 of them Arab Israelis, Palestinians, that were living in the north. So the question is, where do we go from here, and what is success? And more specifically, all we have been told in the West is that Iran is the center. Iran's money funds all these other groups. If Iran's money was not there, then these other groups would not be able to exist. If they were not able to get weapons. Oh, that's the other thing, is that Assad fell in Syria, which meant that you were not able to transport weapons to some of these groups as easily. You would have to figure out new ways to transport weapons. We have seen now the entire collapse of Iran's proxy program. And Israel has been allowed to be unrestrained in their ability to do it. Now let's focus on the home front a little bit. Donald Trump's base, in part, has elected him twice because he is not the guy to go to war. And the most likely war in the Middle East, not China, the most likely war in the Middle East that has been on the table forever, since the 70s, is Iran. Donald Trump committing American troops to Iran would be, for his coalition, in my opinion, a betrayal of a core principle of why he was elected. It would be unless sentiment dramatically shifts, and I don't suspect it, because currently Israel is not exactly at a high point for popularity, regardless of your opinion personally. If we are just looking dispassionately at it, I cannot imagine that even Donald Trump, even with the coalition that he has built, even with the people for whom are with him no matter what, that you would see them say, absolutely, we need to put boots on the ground in Tehran for regime change. Now, could Trump sell the idea of we're going to drop a bomb? Maybe. Air power, it would be very Clintonian. I'll tell you that. Bill Clinton believed that the Air Force was the future of all combat. He was talked into that we could still have a muscular foreign policy where we took out the people that we thought were bad and we installed the people that we thought were good, but we would never have to put a boot on the ground again because our Air Force was so superior. Great taste, less filling. And that seems to be the big question now. There's an underground bunker for which it is imagined that the most advanced enrichment of uranium for Iran, the kind of stuff that they would use for a weapon, that is kept. Israel does not have, as far as we know, Israel does not have the weapons to bomb that themselves. It would require a bomb that only America would be able to provide. Do we do it? You have a little bit more leeway there. But I will say this, having watched the MAGA coalition, Trump is on shaky ground. We're not even going to get to it here, but Trump has ordered ICE to pause raids on farms and hotels. That is creating a lot of consternation with the Buchanan right, the largest deportation effort in history right. This is a moment of questioning from the true believers on two, when I say core, I mean core issues of why Donald Trump is different than every other Republican politician that came before him. Because go back to 2016. Go back to 2016 when you looked at that stage. You had, that I remember, two people that talked different than the orthodoxy. You had Rand Paul and you had Donald Trump. Donald Trump was the clearest on two issues: immigration and foreign policy. Those are big issues that got him elected. So, watching what happens here is going to be very, very interesting. It's also going to be interesting to see it from the perspective of the Israeli government. I would be remiss if I did not mention that Netanyahu faced his first major test of power, not but days before this operation was launched. There is an orthodox faction of his coalition that keeps him the prime minister of Israel that he had to capitulate to stay in power. Does that factor into it? In general, as far as I can follow Israeli, popular sentiment, while there is a large vocal portion of the country, if not an outright majority, that wants them to wind down what's happening in Gaza, there is an equally high sentiment that wants them, if they are going to be involved in all this, go cut off the head of the snake. Iran. I don't know how this breaks in terms of American policy. It's one thing to wave a Palestinian flag. It is another to wave an Iranian flag, despite the fact that, Hamas, the controlling interest in Gaza, is no more friendly to the United States in its rhetoric. But Iran, is a much larger country that has been an international pariah and has called the United States the Great Satan since the Islamic Revolution so many decades ago. Obviously something to keep an eye on.
Joining us now is Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar. Condolences to you, Senator Klobuchar, all your colleagues, everyone there in Minnesota. I know both legislators were close friends of yours, and especially Speaker Hartman. Tell us about her.
You know, Melissa Hortman was a woman that I wish everyone around the country knew. When you think about a true public servant who goes into it for the right reasons, it's Melissa. You know, she started out as a mom with little kids. She was working at her dad's used auto part company, and I got to know her then, and I saw how she door knocked and knew practically every person in her district. She was able to juggle being a Sunday school teacher, being a Girl Scout leader, training service dogs for veterans. And she and Mark, and I think of their kids today on Father's Day, they lost their mom and their dad. They were able to juggle it all, and maybe that's what helped her be this incredible legislator who worked her way up to Speaker of the House, who helped lead the efforts to pass this incredible work on paid family leave, where Minnesota is on the map in such a big way to help people, or free school lunch, or the work she just did this last year with the governor, where we had a literally tied legislature, and she and her Republican counterpart, another woman, were able to negotiate a budget and get that done so we didn't go into government shutdown in a very difficult time. She was a true leader, and loved her work, but was always so grounded and such a decent person. I think that's probably the best word to describe her. You look at her pictures and you know what she was about. So we miss her greatly. And so when you hear about statistics about political violence and threats, I just want people to know who we're talking about. Or Senator Hoffman, who is equally respected, got into politics because his daughter has spina bifida and she couldn't get insurance, and he wanted to advocate for her. Decent people who didn't deserve this to happen to them at 2 in the morning in the middle of a night, when all they're doing is trying to represent the people that they were elected to represent.
That is, again, a clip from ABC's This Week. Martha Raddatz in conversation with Senator Amy Klobuchar. She remembers the victim of what was a heinous and horrifying assassination over the weekend. Vance Luther Bolter, 57, is the primary suspect in 2 politically motivated shootings, one fatal in Minnesota on Saturday. He allegedly impersonated a police officer using a fake police-style SUV and latex mask to enter homes in Brooklyn Park and Champlain. State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband were killed. Meanwhile, Senator John Hoffman and his wife were injured. Authorities found a manifesto and target list naming 70 politicians, abortion providers, and others, along with No King's Day signs. We will get to that in a second. Bolter has a background in many, many, many things, including private security, evangelical work, and formal service on the Minnesota Workforce Development Board. That is a government position. He remains at large and is considered armed and dangerous with a $50,000 reward. I'm going to update my Twitter here now to see if there is anything. There was a car found that is being ascribed to Bolter, and now there is another targeted manhunt here. So let's get into who this guy was, because it's part of the insanity of it. Bolter built a career in international security and missionary work, serving as the CEO of the Red Lion Group, a democratic, which worked in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and co-heading the Praetorian Guard Security Services with his wife, Jenny. Educated in international relations and leadership, he spent time in food service management. His wife was detained on Saturday with weapons and passports. Bolter also lived part-time in Minneapolis with longtime friend and roommate David Carlson, who received a farewell text before the shootings. Carlson and another roommate were close friends of over 40 years and read his text aloud to television reporters, saying that they didn't know anything, but he is sorry because he might soon be dead. There is video of Bolter preaching in Congo. He earned degrees in international research from St. Cloud State and advanced leadership from Cardinal Stritch University. Before security, Bolter held management roles at 7-Eleven, Johnsonville Sausage, Del Monte, and Green Corps. Pause here to understand what I think is the most important. The most important is that 2 people are dead. And that the violence that comes from this is likely directed by the fact that that one of them was engaged in public service. 2 other people are shot. They had to be put in the hospital, and they are thankfully recovering. That's the first thing that we need to figure out, right? That's the first thing in my mind that we need to care about. And if you're organizing a news article, you want to keep that up front and center. I've said on this show multiple times that whenever we talk about political polarization, that anything that you think is bad is not as bad as the 60s, because we were killing politicians at a pretty regular clip. When Donald Trump was shot, I obviously came back to that. We have seen a rise in politically motivated violence. Donald Trump took a bullet in his ear. He then faced another assassination attempt that was thankfully foiled before the trigger could be pulled. We have seen 2 members of the Israeli embassy gunned down in the middle of the street. We saw elderly Jewish protesters immolated. And now, a shooting of a state politician in Minnesota. This is unequivocally a terrible, terrible, terrible escalation. And I want to make it extraordinarily clear, as somebody who is about as obsessed with politics as one can be, I immerse myself in this cesspool willingly. I would do it for free, but I am excited that I can make it my job because I do love it. I find it fascinating. What I will say is this: politics can be a cover and a mask, because it is so popular right now, for other deeply rooted problems in one's life. And I've seen a lot of it since a few animating issues. October 7th is one. The election is another, where you have varying degrees of inhumanity that are justified. And most of them are just bad behavior. But I don't think that there is an argument now to be said that there are not some people that have deeply, deeply, deeply held problems that are using political justification to do things that are horrific, are murderous, are barbaric. It is at this point that I will remind you guys that I never believe that somebody who kills somebody else cleanly aligns with mainstream Western political thought. I don't know what to make of leaks from the police talking about what's in the manifesto. especially as this is obviously going to be not just a politically charged situation, but a personal one. You know, the people that ultimately are the authorities here are friends with the people that were murdered. That is obviously a complicating factor here. My larger overarching point is that I don't believe anybody is going to read a manifesto like that and say, man, this dude had it going on. I also don't know what to make of the fact that he was named to a governor's council by 2 different governors, or his resume, you know, which is obviously eclectic. I am worried by a world in which violence is not roundly condemned. It was what made me uneasy about Luigi, about a very serious thing like a death that was then looked at as a, well, you know. And I understand. It is because I take these things seriously that I do not want to see them put into life or death. And that is why it's okay to murder somebody perspectives, because those, when it evolves beyond that, the solutions are ugly. The solutions go beyond we can reason through it. This is deeply, deeply, deeply unsettling. And I'm going to do my best, because the motives here, until we see what happens where this guy is, if they do release the manifesto, there's shoes that are willing to drop. Which again, $50,000 to anybody who knows where this guy is or leads to his arrest. So that's also the biggest story, is that this is an active manhunt. But we don't know what the motivations are until we either see the manifesto or we understand more from it. It is not the same as, you know, somebody shooting 2 Israeli embassy workers and then screaming Free Palestine, or the guy who was burning the Jews who's screaming Free Palestine. I think at that point you understand pretty clearly where he comes from. The roommate who read the text message says that he did vote for Trump, that he was very pro-life. That would lead one to believe that there is a connection there, fully possible. But we also don't know whether or not he knew these people personally, whether or not, you know, the hit list that he wrote down, you know, the justifications of people that will go to these lengths, in my experience, are very rarely A to B. But we will obviously keep an eye on this, because the fact that it's an active manhunt, in my opinion, makes it the #1 story domestically here in the United States. And finally, masses of No King's Day protests unfolded on Saturday, coinciding with President Trump's 79th birthday and the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary parade. Hundreds of thousands of participants in more than 2,000 events, some said into the millions, with large gatherings in cities like San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Salt Lake City. Demonstrations also emerged abroad in Amsterdam, where several hundreds marched, and protests organized by groups including the 5501 movement, intended to counter what participants described as the authoritarian overreach of the Trump administration. Even in places like Los Angeles, it seems like everything was peaceful. That is a great, great, great thing to report. There was a gunshot that was heard that apparently did hit somebody in Salt Lake City. That person is in the hospital. Apparently the gun was fired from somebody that was already at the protest, so it wasn't an attack on the protest. It was just a gun going off and hitting somebody, which is a best case scenario. Because if this had ended in riots and fires, I think we would have been in a worse situation. I mentioned the 5501 coalition that includes the American Civil Liberties Union and teachers unions. This was an organized protest to get the word out there. And part of the reason why it happened was because of this parade that was happening in Washington, D.C. And that was the United States Army marking its 250th anniversary with a grand parade. The event featured approximately 6,600 troops, over 150 military vehicles, helicopters, warplanes, historical reenactors, parachutists, and high-tech demonstrations, including robot dogs and drones. President Trump, First Lady Melania Trump, Vice President Vance, Secretary of Defense Hegseth, and others participated, with Trump praising the armed forces. The parade cost estimated between $25 and $45 million. Okay. Donald Trump is Donald Trump. He is going to inspire tremendous opposition, and very much so there are issues in this country, including deportations that are very unpopular with a lot of people, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, apparently, that all decided to make their voice heard by leaving their house and going out for a protest on Saturday. That is amazing. That is great. That is what makes America, America. I don't know why it happened for this parade. And I'll just say this. I had known of this parade. To be totally honest, this was not on my purview. The biggest thing that I've been focusing on now are like the New York City mayoral race and the big, beautiful bill. I've been focusing on things that were not the parade. I thought the parade was a dumb thing. I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to it. And then it snuck up. I was mostly focused on the protests, on whether or not the protests were going to be violent. And I have not watched the entire parade. But I want to play you a clip from MSNBC. Just so you don't take my word for it as being tainted. This is how MSNBC described the vibe around the parade.
One thing I will say, I want to go back to you, Ali, that again, when we talk about this sort of tension in the country, and sometimes, you and I have both been at Trump rallies, those can be very tense, a kind of, I would say, like kind of a dark, malevolent energy sometimes in them. Not always, but it doesn't seem like that's the energy on the mall today, which I think is a good sign, right?
Correct. That you're really correct about that, Chris, and it's something we were watching for. Yeah. I'm just sort of surprised by the number of people who were at the front of the parade, watching, cheering, and then would come and ask to take a selfie. Yeah, right. This is a very different mood here. Yeah. People seem to be going out of their way to say that they're here to celebrate the Army's 250th birthday. Now, there are people walking around with signs. A moment ago, while you were talking to Jen, guy just came around and said, Trump 2028. And I said, how does that work exactly? And he's like laughing and had a big flag on him. So there's some politicization here, but it is not, it's not dark. It's not tense. It's not amped up. It's different. It's different from covering a Trump rally.
And I would describe what I saw as kind of quaint to dorky. It's a lot of old uniforms where they went through every armed combat that the United States has gone through, and they showed the old tech and they showed the old uniforms, and there was some cool stuff. There was a robot dog. Trump spoke for 9 minutes. Was not a Trump speech. No one sang happy birthday to him. If anything, it felt like the Army's 250th birthday. It felt like what was on the tin. So if it's not this fascist commitment to dear leader, which is how it was painted by its most vociferous critics, then what can you criticize it for? Well, I've heard two things, one of which I agree with, the other I have come to not agree with. Number one, it's the cost. Did we need to spend $45 million on a military parade? Well, estimates range that 40 to 60 million people have been given the oath for the Army from 1775 to today. 40 to 60 million. So let's round it to 45 million. That would mean that we paid $1 for every person who pledged themselves to die for the country. There's a lot of stuff that the American government spends a lot of money on. I, with a straight face, have been on this show telling you that a $9.8 billion rescissions package doesn't mean anything. So if I'm telling you that a $9.8 trillion rescissions package doesn't mean anything, then $45 million for the 250th anniversary of the Army seems fine. Seems fine to me. I don't have a problem with the price tag. Here's what I do have a problem with that I did see a lot of criticism on. There was some private funding. Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Palantir, Coinbase, all gave money for this parade. And I think it's good that they gave money for the parade. If they have people that either served in the Army or are contractors, like Lockheed Martin, like Northrop Grumman, that's fine. Here's my thing with anybody in the military-industrial complex that kicked in cash. Good. You should. Also, I don't think you need a shout out, because that's what rubbed people the wrong way, is that you would have these people come out, and by people I mean the soldiers. They would come out, and then it'd be like, brought to you by Palantir. And it's like, oh, geez. Maybe just a little thing at the end, huh? How about we just have J.D. Vance come out and say, by the way, thank you to our partners from blah, 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 blah. Just read a list of names at the end. I think you can get away with the read a list of names at the end. I don't think we need the big announcement. When we do this for the Navy, when we do this for the other armed service branches, and I think we should. I think a lot of people come in through these armed services thing, and I was kind of left bummed that this became politicized, because, you know, it should have been a day where we just said, hey, thank you to the Army. If they get one thank you every 250 years, I think that we should just, I mean, we're here, you know, thank you. Thank you. My grandfather was an Army paratrooper. I think it would have been nice. It would have been nice if there was just more of a consensus in saying hooray to the Army. But Trump wanted it to be a grand spectacle. He wanted tanks to be rolling through D.C. That obviously put people on edge. I just wish that this would have been meant, you know, I wish MSNBC would have been talking about it beforehand in the way that they were talking about it when it was happening. If we're going to use MSNBC as a reverberation from a certain element of our political spectrum. But I will say, compared to the first two stories, which I find to be very ominous to extraordinarily ominous. You know, we have Israel and Iran, possibly a fissure point for World War III. We have the continuing escalation of political violence in America, politically justified violence in America. Dark, dark. Those two, the No Kings protests that only had one Yahoo fire a gun, and we didn't have any cities on fire at the end of it. And the supposedly fascist parade that was just kind of a quaint thing. Trump gave let me get the verbiage right here. The oath of enlistment to 250 Army recruits. That's a memory that they're going to have forever. That's cool. That's cool for them. And if part of what this Department of Defense wants to do is get recruitment numbers up, it's cool that they did that. It's cool that Trump's speech was only 9 minutes and was about the Army and he didn't meander into other stuff. So by and large, we're going to end this on a high note. I thought both of these were, in very different ways, great elements of the American experiment.
Politics
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics. This is the Sunday edition. We didn't have a ton of clips from the Sunday shows because I think there was just enough news for us, obviously, to handle. If you enjoyed this, then very much consider becoming a member of our paying subscription base at TakePoliticsSeriously.com. You get a Sunday episode. If this is fit into your cadence, if you've been listening to this on your Monday commute, well, then do yourself a favor, friend. Get on the boat, baby, because you could have this same experience on Thursday morning when we do another exclusive. But obviously the news demanded this one get out into the bloodstream. We will have great content for you coming up this week. Until then, this is your old pal, Justin Robert Young, saying, wait a minute. We might have the reason for the season here. We might have the reason for the season. Here we go. She already stained the custom shirt. But we have the Bella. We have the Bella making a cameo. She made a cameo on the Friday edition. She makes a cameo now. But there we go. All right. Until next time, this is your old pal, Justin Robert Young and Bella Young, saying politics has 3 names. Wave goodbye. Wave goodbye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.